At midnight on the night of August 28, 1941, Admiral Vladimir Tribets was on board the Soviet cruiser Kirov off the coast of Estonia. He was the commander of an armada of mixed vessels numbering up to 190, all evacuees from the Soviet Baltic port of Tallinn. Admiral Tribets had ordered all ships to drop anchor and sit absolutely still, because out there, just under the surface of the water, was a lurking menace. It was pitch black out, and darkness and cold covered everything like the cold grip of death's hands. That menace had already claimed 23 ships, and it was still out there. The entire Soviet evacuation fleet was in the middle of a minefield. What's up, folks? This is Steel. Welcome to History and Combat. What you see in front of you is the brand new Russian Tier 5 cruiser Kirov. It was a Project 26 cruiser, laid on October 22nd, 1935, and launched on November 30th, 1938, out of Leningrad. So, no, folks, this is not a paper ship. This ship was actually built, and it actually did serve in World War II. It was the lead ship in a class of 6 cruisers derived from the Italian cruiser Raimondo Montecuccoli. The Kirov, you see, was the first large warship built by the Soviets from the keel up after the Russian Civil War, and it was actually built with the help of the Italians, the Ansaldo Company. The Soviets needed help at the time from foreign nations because Soviet industry was not fully capable of designing large, complex warships. This Italian design was 7,200 tons, with initially 6 180mm guns and 3 turrets. However, due to advancements in technology, the designer was actually able to persuade the Soviets to up the guns to 9. That's 3 per turret. And that's essentially the design that you see in the Kirov in the game. Like I said before, there were 6 Kirov class cruisers built, but only the first 2 was the exact iteration of this first design. The next 2 upgraded the armor and other components, and that's also known as the Maxim Gorky class. The last 2 never saw combat. The final version of the first 2 ships, the Kirov class, was 7,890 standard tons, 9,287 tons fully loaded. It was capable of going 35 knots at its trial run, but its one major limitation was how large the ship actually was and the fact that it only had one single rudder, which limited its maneuverability. In the game, you can see that it has a turning radius of about 800 meters, which is battleship big. But the most interesting aspect of this ship is actually the one that's most interesting in the game as well, and that's the 9 180mm guns. In the game, these guns shoot laser beams out past 16 kilometers. And this reflects the real life estimation of the range of these guns, which turned out to be, and I don't even know if this is real, but this is what it says, 38,000 meters? And to put that in perspective, that is way past over the horizon. Actually, probably twice as far as the horizon is. And the reason why it could shoot this far was because they were built very strong. They had extremely high pressure in the barrel. And on top of that, the barrel was a 57 caliber. Now, some of you may notice that in the game, there'll be 2 numbers with the guns. It'll give you the diameter, which is the millimeters or the inches. In this case, it's 180 millimeters, and then it's a letter designation, and then another number. That last number is the actual caliber of the gun, which basically means in naval rifles, the length of the barrel. The higher the number, the better. To get the actual length of the barrel, it's actually quite simple. You multiply the diameter in millimeters, in this case 180, multiply it by the caliber, 57, and what you wind up with is 10.2 meters, or 10,260 millimeters. And that's how long the barrel is on the Kirov, 33.6 feet. Now, in the game, these guns are superb, as demonstrated in this match. You can shoot out to your max range, and you don't have to lead that much. And you're going to need every bit of that range to survive, because the Kirov really only has 50 millimeters of armor over all of its important components. One of the interesting things that I discover in doing research for history and combat, though, is the difference between the way the guns are represented, or the ships are represented in the game, and they were in real life. Now, the turrets and guns on the Kirov had some significant flaws that aren't represented in the game. Remember when I said earlier that the designer convinced the Soviets to pack a third gun in each of these turrets? Well, that turned out to be a bad move. The guns were too close together, and the turret itself was actually too cramped. The guns being too close together meant that the muzzle blast from one gun affected the dispersion of the other guns. And the turret being too cramped, well, that increased the reload time of each of the guns. Actually, in the Kirov's case, it was doubled. In the game, it's 15 seconds. In real life, it was closer to 30 seconds. An interesting fun fact, both of the Kirov's two front guns are actually on display at the St. Petersburg Museum, and you can see pictures of them online at wikipedia.com. In those pictures, it clearly shows how close together those guns actually were. As far as the Kirov's World War II record is concerned, it was actually quite brutal. It started off its career as a member of the Baltic Fleet against Finland. As far as naval warfare is concerned, this fight against Finland was largely uneventful. The icy conditions of the Baltic Sea, the defensive nature of Finland, the Soviets' own limited naval assets in the Baltic, and the fact that the Baltic Fleet was actually set up to be a coastal defense fleet, not necessarily an offensive force. Just like in the land war, the Finnish coastal defenses were extremely rugged, extremely stingy. Most of the guns that they used were Soviet leftovers, but the Finns had actually upgraded them, some to the size of 12 inches. These guns could also be used in the land attack role as well. In one story, the Soviets tried to cross the Gulf of Viipuri, which had iced over, and these big coastal fort guns actually broke the ice underneath the feet of the Soviet attackers. Unbelievable. The Kirov also felt the effects of these coastal guns as well. While it was escorting a couple of destroyers during a bombardment of Rusaro, the Kirov actually only got to fire 35 rounds before close and accurate fire from the Finnish guns forced her to turn away for repairs. After that, the Soviets scrapped all plans to attack Finland from the sea, and the Finnish naval campaign became more of a blockade. The Soviets' main operating port in the Baltic Sea was what is today the Estonian capital of Tallinn. And during Operation Barbarossa, Tallinn was essentially cut off within the first few weeks of the war, leaving the bulk of the Soviet fleet in port. It's estimated that up to 190 ships of the Baltic Fleet were trapped, and it led to one of the bloodiest naval disasters in world history. It's called the evacuation of Tallinn, the Tallinn disaster, or the Russian Dunkirk. As German forces swiftly surrounded the city, it left the Soviets with no options but to attempt a breakout. The Kirov was the flagship under the command of Admiral Vladimir Tributz. It was his job to coordinate up to 40 transports and other auxiliary ships, 121 military vessels including the Kirov, some destroyers, torpedo boats, submarines, minesweepers. During the breakout, mines and air attacks caused massive losses, as the German minefields could not be properly swept. First came attacks from the air from Ju-88s. Then the Soviets had to cross a massive minefield. After that came attacks from German and Finnish E-boats, which were basically fast torpedo boats, which were nasty ships at close range. Usually the E-boats would approach at night with orders to maintain full silence. Then, when the order was given, they'd go full speed and attack, zooming around the ships in the fleets. The defenders had no idea who was attacking, where the attacks were coming from. It was chaotic, messy, and very, very deadly. But this attack also prevented the Soviets from further mine-sweeping operations. So essentially, when the evening of August 28th came, they were sitting ducks in the middle of a minefield. And this is where the details get a little bit sketchy. Sources do differ on this because there was a cover-up, but some say that the Soviet warships cut and run in the morning, leaving the slower merchant ships to fend for themselves, basically. And when it was all said and done, 12,000 people were dead, 28 transports were sunk, 16 warships, 6 small transports, and 34 merchant vessels. The Kirov herself survived the gauntlet to escape to Leningrad, where again she was trapped in port during the siege of Leningrad. This siege lasted for an amazing 872 days. 1.5 million people were killed, the greatest loss of life ever known to a modern city. While in port, the Kirov did fight though. The Germans tried to sink her with bombs, with artillery, but she survived the siege and was liberated in 1944. Her last action was the Vyborg-Petrozavodsk offensive, a counterattack against the Finns. This non-paper ship served the Soviet Navy all the way through 1974, when she was finally scrapped after a long and brutal career.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Feel free to like or comment, and if you're interested in seeing more content in the future, subscribe. My live stream is currently on Twitch at the URL you can see right there. And if you're interested in even more World of Warships videos, I highly recommend The Taste. The link is down below. Thanks again.